Hey everybody, before the video starts for Dan Barker here, I just wanted to apologize real quick for the video and the audio were not in sync when I recorded it. I did this live at the library that he gave his speech at, and I had never taken my equipment with me and done it elsewhere like that before. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to interlace images of Dan throughout the video just to kind of make it a little bit more palatable to watch. But again, my apologies on that. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get into this because he gives a really nice speech about his new book. It's called Contraduction. So keep your eyes out for that. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get into this video. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the event today. I'm James, I'll be your facilitator. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm part of the Southeastern Virginia Atheist, Skeptics, and Humanist group, or CVASH for short, for anybody who isn't a member of the group. It's a Facebook group here in Hampton Roads area that is run by Aiden over here in the back. So thank you, Aiden, for helping coordinate this event today. Also, for those of you who don't know me, I'm an ex-Jehovah's Witness turned atheist. I run two YouTube channels. One is Former 2 Free, XJW, and the other is Apostate Weekly, which is a news channel. And I like to be an activist and tell about cults and their activities and how they run and operate. And this event today, I'm going to put on my Former 2 Free channel. So for anybody who wants the link, please get in touch with me and I'll be happy to give it to you. Right now, though, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Dan Barker, who is an atheist activist, ex-evangelical preacher, musician, author of several books. He's also known for being co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation with his wife, Annie Laurie Gaylor. The co-founder of the Clergy Project, is on the Speakers Bureau for the Secular Student Alliance, as well as many other things. Dan came out as an atheist in January of 1984. So Dan, happy belated anniversary on coming out as an atheist on that one. That's quite a long time, my friend, especially back in those times. That's really remarkable right there. FFRF is a free thought organization that has over 40,000 members nationwide. One of the biggest things they do is help promote the separation of church and state and help educate the public on matters relating to non-theism. If you'd like further information on that, please visit ffrf.org, where you can be kept up to date on the latest free thought topics and also to become a member. But at this time, I'd like to invite Mr. Barker up to the podium, and let's give him our full attention. Thank you.
Thank you. James, is it?
Yes.
Thank you, James. I've made a lot of friends with Jehovah's Witnesses. When I walk home from work every day, I have about a 3-mile walk through the university, and we're on a first-name basis, and they know we don't agree with each other, but they know that as a minority, atheists and Jehovah's Witnesses and others have been mistreated, and so we have sort of that in common, you know. But I'd like to ask you after this is over, is there one or two things I should be saying to them, or should I just ignore them when I walk by them? They're pretty nice people. Don't answer now, but I mean, I want to ask you later.
Sure.
You know, they're very nice people and they're friendly and, you know, all that. Is there a silver bullet, or does it depend on the person? I can tell you what would have impacted me when I was an evangelical preacher. And of course, all evangelicals are different, but I'll tell you that in a moment. So today I'm going to talk about my next book that's coming out. And yesterday I mentioned it over in Roanoke, just briefly for about 2 or 3 minutes, which was the first time I actually spoke about it in public. So today's the actual real talk, so you get to see the real talk about it. Steven Pinker, who's the author of many books like The Blank Slate and Rationality, you've seen him. He's been like the big name in free thought and in science. He gave it a big thumbs up, and he's written a nice blurb on the back. He says, people should read this book, and my book is coining a new word. And Steven Pinker happens to be the editor of the American Heritage Dictionary. And I'm thinking, and he didn't say anything. Of course, he can't decide what words go in the dictionary. But 10, 20 years from now, maybe this new word of mine will end up in the dictionary. So far, everyone's saying so. A.C. Grayling, who's a big British philosopher, he said, "You must read this book." It's not in print yet. It's sent to the publisher right now. Do you know Anu Garg, who does a word a day, wordsmith.org? He's read it, and we've been kind of good friends. You can sign up and get a word a day from him on your email. He's really into words. And a number of other people. Andrianne, who's the widow of Carl Sagan, she says, "Yes, I'm all on board with this. This is great." And so the simplest way to explain it, the word is contraduction. Not contradiction, but contraduction. And the simplest way to explain that is, it kind of almost happened to me today driving over here. Have you ever been sitting in a train that's not moving, and you're next to another train that's not moving, when suddenly that other train starts to move and you briefly think it's you who's moving? Have you ever had that experience? Like, you got it backwards. Contraduction is a fallacy that, unknown to you for a while at least, or sometimes for a long time, you're getting things completely backward from what reality really is. When I was an evangelical preacher, I thought meaning and purpose in life had to come from top down, had to come from above when I was out preaching the gospel. And now I realize, and I have another book called Life-Driven Purpose. And some of you know what that title is about, because there's that big Rick Warren book, Purpose-Driven Life, where I don't think there is a purpose of life or a meaning of life. And if there were, that would cheapen life, because it would mean we were subservient, we are secondary, we are like beneath some commanding officer or some slave master who gives us our purpose and our orders, and we do what they say, right? I think there's no purpose of life, but there's purpose in life. There's plenty of purpose in life. And so it's a reversal. Instead of a top-down system where there's authority above us, it's a bottom-up system. And so that's another example of contradiction. So before I go further into the book, James referred to my past. In 1984, it was actually 1983 that I knew, after 19 years of preaching the gospel, I knew that I didn't believe anymore. I didn't know what to call it. I just knew that I'd peeled back all the layers of the onion, and I realized there's got to be something in here, like C.S. Lewis in his book, Mere Christianity. He thought Christianity can be peeled back to a core. There's the real mere Christianity. And I kept peeling, and finally there was nothing left. You know, what is essential and what isn't? Some of you may have gone through that, right? Through your own religious heritage or lack of it. And you study, you think, you examine, and you realize, wow, there's nothing there. So in 1983, I became this, I didn't know what the word was. I just realized I didn't believe anymore. I didn't want to be an atheist, because that word had, like communist or evil or Satanist. I thought that's what it meant. I didn't know. I was so ignorant about all of these things that you people probably know just like from all your reading. And it was in 1984 in January when I sent out my letter of deconversion. There's a switch, a contradiction, right? Instead of going this way, you're going this way. It's 180 degrees. And if you can imagine the reactions from my letter that I sent out to everybody, family members and ministers and co-missionaries and Christian publishers. I had published some Christian music, which actually is still selling today. I'm still getting royalties today from some of that older music. If you can imagine the reaction, I got it. I got some really surprisingly kind, warm, loving reactions from Christians who heard that I had left the faith and no longer believed in God. And some of us are still friends today, which is kind of cool, because we were friends. We actually like each other. And I got some surprisingly ugly and disappointing reactions from people that I thought were my friends, co-workers and that, who just couldn't handle the fact that one of theirs would change their mind. You probably get that in JW, right? Family members and that. So some family members were still just good family members, and others have totally shunned me. Like, I can't even, Keith now is dead now, but he would never talk to me again, my Uncle Keith. So I didn't know what to do. I'd been preaching for 19 years, and I got a temporary job as a computer programmer for a while. But I read a book by a woman named Annie Laurie Gaylor called Woe to the Women, the Bible Tells Me So, in early 1984. And I thought, oh, this is cool. This is a different point of view from the Bible. I never heard anyone talk about how the Bible and the modern laws treat women based on these archaic laws in the Bible. So I wrote a letter to her. There was an address in the book, and she didn't respond, but her mother did. She and her mother, Ann Gaylor and Annie Laurie Gaylor, had founded the Freedom from Religion Foundation in the 1970s. So Ann wrote me a letter saying, hey, you got a good story. You used to be a preacher. Why don't you write us an article? So I sent an article to their newspaper, Free Thought Today. And then I got a phone call from a producer in Chicago. And the woman on the phone said, hey, we just heard that you used to be a preacher and now you're an atheist. And we're doing a show on our Chicago TV show about atheism. And we've invited Ann Gaylor and Annie Laurie Gaylor. And they thought you might be a good guest too, because they were never religious, but you used to be religious. So that must be interesting. And so I said, well, okay, sure, I'll go. So I flew to Chicago for the show, and there was a young host of the show called Oprah Winfrey. She had a show called AM Chicago just before she became like this big famous person, you know. And the producers did a great job. They packed that audience with a bunch of Bible thumpers and preachers, and you know, it was good TV. You know, it was a good dynamic. And that day, and you can go online and watch that show. Actually, it's been recorded. You look up like Oprah and Barker and something. You'll find it, and Gaylor. And that was not only the first time that I had knowingly met any other atheists, people who call themselves atheists. And I say knowingly because I think in our lives we meet them all the time. You just don't know it, right? What kind of a symbol should you wear? Or what kind of a? Do some of you have like atheist shirts or humanist hats or something? That was the first time I had knowingly actually met somebody who said they were atheists. And I thought, well, I guess I am too. And that was also the first time I had spoken about this. I was invited on the show, and I'd never actually, because once you're a preacher and you leave the pulpit, what do? Who's your audience? There's no more audience. You're gone, right? What happens to former clergy? And James mentioned that I was a co-founder of the Clergy Project, which is helping people like that. There's now more than 1,200 members of the Clergy Project, like former and current clergy, priests and pastors and ministers. Now there's a chance for them to connect. There's a chance for them to get help to get out of the ministry. They no longer believe. But here I was on live TV with this host named Oprah Winfrey asking these questions, and I'd never put the words together. I just was, I left my faith. So you can see me on that show kind of struggling to say these phrases that now just flow out naturally after all these years. They're just easy to say because I've been thinking about it for so long. And so that was kind of fun to be saying these things. Because sometimes you have a reality, but when you speak it, then you've said it, right? Now it's like a real reality. It's like a social reality. Now I'm identified as this. But besides those two things, it was also the first time I had ever spoken to a hostile audience. And I loved that. I thought, whoa! Because when you're a preacher, when you're in the pulpit like this and and the people are coming, they're with you, right? It's amen and it's yes and God, hallelujah. And so you kind of wonder, how sincere is it? How, is this just a drama or what is this? But when you're speaking to an audience that hates you, you know that what you're saying is making a difference. And I thought, wow, for the first time I'm getting an honest reaction from, and I thought, this is cool, So, and they thought they were one of them, if you watch the show, one of them was calling Annie Laurie a witch because she was a feminist, and it was pretty exciting. And so that was also the day that I met Annie Laurie, and 3 years later, she and I got married. We've been co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation since 2004, but I started working back in '87 as a PR director. So we have a daughter, and we showed our daughter that. Here's the videotape of the day your mom and dad met each other. And you can kind of see, I wasn't sure what atheists were going to be like. I thought atheists were going to be like these super Dr. Spock kind of super rational, critical, don't say anything wrong, or you know what I mean? I was thinking, well, I just imagine they were just this, and they were kind of worried about me, like maybe I would reconvert right there on live TV, and so we were kind of like on live TV, kind of like getting to know each other, and you could see a point where we relaxed. Okay, we're among friends here. This is great, and then from then on, it's been just fun. It's just been a blast. It's been a great time. Freedom from Religion Foundation started in '76 as a local group. In '78, it became a national group it started with like 3 people. Ann and Annie Laurie were the original founders, with a man from Milwaukee who died just shortly after. But the group grew. It kind of started accidentally. And I always hear the story slightly different each time, but here's the way I remember them telling me the story. They were working primarily for women's rights. Ann Gaylor had written the first editorial in the state of Wisconsin in favor of abortion rights back in the 60s, and so she was becoming like a figure. And so they were protesting for feminism and for birth control and for women's rights and for equality and for all of that. And she noticed that the major enemy of women's rights was organized religion. It was the church. She noticed that, and of course we know that. And they went down to some city-county meeting to testify, to give at a hearing. They went there to this meeting, but before the meeting started, at a public meeting, a priest got up and gave a prayer. Here, this is a civic public meeting, and a priest gave a prayer. And Anne got up and she put down her notes and she said, wait a minute. You people are the enemies of women's rights, and yet you're married with religion and you're influencing religion. Why is there a prayer? There should not be a prayer. I don't believe in God. Why does everybody have to be forced to follow someone else's religion, especially when you are oppressing people? And I'm paraphrasing what she said because it wasn't recorded, but after she was done, a reporter came up to Anne and said, so that's interesting. You don't think there should be prayer? And she says, no. Well, what do you think? And she says, I think the government should be free from religion. We should have freedom from religion. And he said, what are you guys? Are you guys like a group or something? And she says, we're a group of people who want freedom from religion. And he said, that's the name of your group? And she said, yeah. And again, I'm not remembering exactly. If she were here, she would tell it slightly different. But so the reporter wrote a story about this. Here's these uppity women complaining about prayer at city council or the county board. And they started getting letters and phone calls from people. I want to join that group, Freedom from Religion. That sounds great. How can I join? And so they thought, well, let's start a group. So they were right there on the dining room table, and we have that dining room table in our new office now. It's kind of like a holy site for us. They, with a typewriter and index cards, and they started a group. And 2 years later, it went national. I joined in '84. They had about 1,000 or 1,200, and I was hired in '87, and there was about 2,000 members at the time, which we thought, wow, amazing, 2,000 members around the country. And I remember the first time we got the first member from the 50th state. We could say, hey, we got members in all 50 states. Today we have more than 40,000 members and are growing. And in the world, we're like the second or third largest free thought group in the world. And we like the word free thinker because free thinker is like an umbrella term. Historically, it has been used to refer to those who are outside of established religion, but mainly the doubters and the skeptics. So free thinkers can be atheists or agnostics or humanists or secular humanists. We're not specifically exclusively an atheist group, although most of our members are atheists. We even have a few religious people join us because they like the mission of keeping religion and government separate. So we like to say, our little joke around the office is that we don't really care what you call yourself. We all disbelieve in the same God, don't we? So free thought, free thinker, if you look it up, it's a single word, not 2 words. It even goes back to the early 1700s. The word free thinker was like the deists and the doubters and the skeptics and those who were outside. They don't take established belief as the rule. They don't take tradition or authority as the rule. Free thinkers take reason, think it through on your own, and that's the rule, basically. And whatever you call yourself. Here's just a little side note. You might have seen that Pew study that came out that said that 4% of Americans are atheists. But Ryan Cragen, a sociologist in in Florida pointed out that study, Pew is really highly respected, but in this one study, they got it kind of mixed it. They kind of had a flawed study because they had a list of all these religions, what do you choose? And atheism was on the list, as if atheism were a religion. 4% of people picked that. Yeah, I'm atheist. But in the same study, they asked another question, do you believe in God? 18.2% said no. So how does that square, right? So these 4% of people who would actually say, I'm proudly a capital A atheist. That's what I am, as if it were a religion, because it's not. But if 18.2%, if atheism is the absence of religion, then there's a lot more atheists in the country who just don't want to wear it as a label. They're just not theistic. So we've been growing, and we have two purposes. The first purpose is to keep state and church separate, which we do through legal action. And the second purpose is to educate the public about the views of non-theists, or whatever label we call ourselves, freethinkers. With the first purpose, we have a lot of attorneys. We have 9 full-time attorneys right now, and I wish I had time to tell you some of the stories. They send out hundreds of letters a year. Maybe some of you have contacted our legal department complaining about mixing religion and government. They're on it. They'll get on it. If they can do anything about it, they will. They'll write a letter, and often we stop an abuse just with one letter. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 letters, but these are legal letters informing the school that they're violating the Constitution. And out of the hundreds of letters we send out every year, at least 20% of them result in a victory, meaning they stop the abuse, which is really nice. Any one of those could have been a lawsuit. But once you remind the school, or more accurately, remind their legal counsel, who tend to know a lot more than the actual principals and teachers themselves know about the law, or even more importantly, their insurance company, because they don't want to have to pay for a losing lawsuit. A lot of times they will just correct it, and once in a while they'll even thank us. Sometimes they correct the abuse reluctantly, like, well, I guess we don't want to spend money. But often, sometimes they will thank us with a no. We didn't know this. We didn't know this was wrong. Ooh, I just broke something. Whatever that is. There's a joke in here, right, somewhere? Out of the pulpit or something. Just really quick, because I want to get back to the book, which is really exciting. When you have a new book in the works, it's like being pregnant and you're waiting for a life to come into the world someday, and someday it will be born and then it'll go out on its own and do its thing. Just a few days ago, what's today? Today's Sunday, right? So earlier last week, at our legal meeting, we finally announced the final resolution of a lawsuit that's against the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, that's been going on since 2015. And these lawsuits can take forever and they can be expensive. In this case, one of our members in Texas was at the state capitol in Austin and noticed there was a nativity scene. So this member complained and we investigated, and it turned out, well, that nativity scene is there in a public forum, which means that some religious group got a permit to put the nativity scene up. And if a governmental body has a policy of a public forum, that's okay, because nobody going by that nativity scene would think it's the state of Texas telling them. It's identified this is from the whatever Baptist or whatever church it was. But a public forum has to be open to all points of view. So our people down there in Texas requested equal time. If you're going to have a nativity scene in December, and you wouldn't believe this, but Christians don't own the whole month of December. If anything, they might have a claim to that one day, the 25th, right? But we said, well, we would like to honor something in December too, just as important, not the birth of a Savior. I mean, if Christians want to believe that, it's a free country. But there's a lot of us who think there are other births. So we had an artist commission a display. It's about this tall, and it has some of the founding fathers and the Statue of Liberty gazing adoringly down at this manger, and in the manger is the Bill of Rights. Because the Bill of Rights was born on December the 15th, right? Not December the 25th, but December the 15th. And in Texas, different states are different, but in Texas you needed actually a legislative sponsor, which means a member of the legislature had to sponsor the thing. And so we got one. A woman said, okay, I'll sponsor that. We had to jump through all these hoops. We had to go through all these commissions of approval, and we had to change the wording. But finally, we got our display up for a couple of weeks in December as equal time, which seems fair in a representative country, right? That all points of view, there should be, Annie Laurie likes to say, there should be room at the inn for all points of view. So we got it up, and it had a display about the importance of the Bill of Rights, and about December the 15th, and all of that. And the day before we were supposed to take it down, the governor of Texas walked by our display and said, "That's sacrilegious. That's offensive. That's ridiculing Christianity. Take that down." So they took it down. If he had just waited a day, it would have come down anyway. But he said, "Take it down." Well, for us, that was like a Christmas present. I mean, solstice present. Because he did something illegal, unconstitutional. He denied it, and they fought it, and we've been fighting since 2015. They lost in court, so they decided to change the policy, and they said, now it's moot, so you can't sue. Really, all we wanted was a declaration that he broke the law. That's all we wanted. The government shouldn't break the law. They should treat everybody fairly. And yet the governor dug in his heels and fought and appeals and cross appeals, and you know how legal things can just take forever and ever. So we won on all the appeals, and this is one case that we took not on Establishment Clause grounds, if you know what I mean, on the First Amendment, the establishment of religion. We took it on free speech, because our free speech was violated, or technically the free speech of the Texans, of our Texan members who wanted to express their views. And we won and we won and we won, and then it was like, well, what about fees? What about legal fees? And because that's where it really hurts the government, especially a school board. If they have to pay, in a time when money is tight, they have to pay out hundreds of thousands of dollars, which has happened in other cases of ours around the country where the school board, or actually their insurance company, pays this money. Well, the state of Texas, it was still wrangling, and we just found out last week that the whole thing is done. There's going to be a check written. We're going to get a check for, I don't know the exact amount, it's hundreds of thousands that our attorneys are going to get for all the hours they put in on it. And they had to track all the hours exactly. You know how that goes. And the other side quibbled with how much, and there's that whole process, how much of fees. So it's finally done, and Sam Grover, who's our lead attorney on this case after all these years, it's done, except they can't decide which department actually writes the check. They're fighting over that now. But so we're expecting any day now the actual check will come in, which means it's totally finished, and we can put out a press release. We beat the governor. The governor did wrong, and of course, the governor doesn't care. I mean, his base likes the fact that he fought against us, right? So probably this lawsuit is going to gain him some votes, right? Even though he's wasting taxpayer money and taxpayer time. Well, that's just one. I could talk about hundreds of other cases. We've taken almost 100 cases, and over the years, we like to try to resolve things without going to court. It's kind of like we're a watchdog group. And when it comes to state-church separation and the First Amendment, who's the police? If you're driving down the highway and you're breaking the speed limit, there could be a patrol car pull you over to enforce the law. But who enforces the law on a First Amendment? Where are the police? Well, it's groups like ours that have to be the police. We have to be watchdogs, and we have to pay attention, and we have to remind them, and we have to be serious about, you can't just threaten legal action. You have to mean it. You have to mean you're ready to go. And in many of these cases, we can't get all the ducks in a row. There's so many things that have to be done with plaintiffs and with standing and jurisdiction, and sometimes it's even a matter of, wow, this is a bad circuit. These judges are horrible. We're not going to win in this case. Sometimes we'll take cases where we may not win, but we know it's educational. We know that people are with us, and then we gain members from that. So we've won more cases than we've lost over the years, because we're careful to make sure. You don't want to go into court making sure. And the ones that we have lost, most of those were lost not on the merits. Most of those were lost on standing. So like we challenged George W. Bush's faith-based initiative. We won in the court. We won at the appeals level. In fact, the conservative Chicago 7th Circuit Appeals agreed with us that this was wrong. Went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ducked it. The Supreme Court didn't say we were wrong. The Supreme Court said, you don't have the standing to take the case. And that's happened a lot. That happened with Michael Newdow in the Pledge of Allegiance. And this happened with us happened when we won the case on the National Day of Prayer. Congress tells the president to issue a day of prayer. And we won that with a strong decision in court. So on these cases that we've lost on standing, there was no legal decision issued saying that we were wrong. The only legal decisions that are in print are saying we were right, but they were able to duck it, to get around it by saying, well, you don't have the right to sue. With the National Day of Prayer, the lower court and the appeals court, they agreed, and then we were thrown out of court because they said, well, you're not really hurt if the president issues a day of prayer. Is there any harm? Really, you just turn it off. Don't look at it, right? Is there any injury? You're not really hurt. And so we asked, who would have injury to sue over something like that then? And basically, it would be the president himself. The Congress is telling the president to issue a day of prayer, and so the president could complain. We taxpayers can't complain according to the courts. There was a number of other cases like that too where we lost on standing. But anyway, that's a lot of the fun stuff. But the other side of what we do besides legal action is educating the public. And a lot of that has to do with debates and books and radio and TV. We have a national radio show since 2006. We just recorded our 929th episode. We have a national TV show called Free Thought Matters, which is broadcast in major cities around the country. I don't think it's broadcast in Chesapeake. I'm sure it's not. But you can watch it. You can then watch it later. Free Thought Matters, you can watch on YouTube, where we interview people. We've done at least 200 of those, maybe more. And we have a studio there, a video studio, and we interview guests. We bring them in or we do it remotely. And then two of our attorneys, female attorneys, Rebecca and Elizabeth, with the American atheist attorney Allison Gill. Those three have put together a podcast now, a monthly podcast called We Dissent, which is pretty fascinating. It's free thought, and it's state-church separation in the law from a woman's attorney point of view, which is pretty neat. And if you want to look that up, it's we-dissent.org and listen to some of those. They talk about a lot of Supreme Court cases and a lot of specific issues on that show, which is needed, I think. So I do a lot of debates. And this book that I wrote called Contraduction started 2 years ago, March of 2022, at a debate in Florida where my opponent, Adam Lloyd Johnson, raised the fine-tuning argument for the existence of God. So some of you know what that is, the fine-tuning argument. You hear that a lot. And during his opening statement, and I've done 140 public debates, which means formal, moderated debates in front of an audience just around the world since 1985. And Johnson got up in his opening statement, and he said the best evidence for the existence of God is this abductive argument from fine-tuning, that all of these constants and parameters and forces of the universe are so finely tuned for life that if anyone were even slightly off, life would not be permissible, which sure looks like the universe was designed, doesn't it, right? So that's the argument they use. And Christopher Hitchens was asked, what did he think was the strongest argument for God? And he said, I think the fine-tuning argument is probably the strongest. It's a bad argument, he said. It's not persuasive, but you have to think about it. You have to put some time into it with this fine-tuning argument, because it kind of seems interesting, right? If even one of these constants were the tiniest little bit off of all these 20 or so constants and parameters, the strengths and ratios of the natural forces, the strong force and the cosmological constant and the rate of expansion of the universe, all these things, if they were any slightly off, there would be no life. It would be just a totally stillborn, dead universe. There would be no galaxies formed and these things we hear. Others have said the same thing. The fine-tuning argument is one that we need to grapple with. So he had said that word abductive. And I had heard the word abductive, but in logic, but I hadn't heard anyone actually use the word abductive. You heard about deductive logic, right? And inductive logic, right? But how many could define what is abductive logic? Basically, and I said this in the debate, basically abductive logic is just your best guess. It's basically all it is. It's an inference to like the best explanation you have. It's kind of like if you're investigating a case, you come up with some suspects. So you can come up with some suspects, but that doesn't prove they're guilty. You still have to file charges. You still have to convince a jury. So an abductive argument is kind of the weakest kind of argument there is. Like, it looks like there's design, right? So that we've never observed design without a designer. And since the universe appears designed, there must be a designer. That's kind of the essence of the abductive argument. So I got up to give my opening statement, and this thought popped into my head. Abductive. I think abductive might have some value if you're in an investigation, but it has no value if you're backwards. If you're pointing the wrong way, it has no value. Really, it just doesn't get you anywhere. And so during my debate, I said, I think we need a new kind of a word. And I was thinking on my feet. I was just ad-libbing. I hadn't really thought this through. And I said, we need like a different kind of word besides abductive. How about postductive? Well, the audience wasn't impressed, and they shouldn't have been. It was kind of a stupid thing to say. But later I was thinking about that. Well, there's got to be something there. And it took a few months later until I realized we don't need a prefix that means after. We need a prefix that means reversed or inversed or opposite. So contraductive. And so the word contraductive was born as a result of that debate. And then I was in Oxford last November for my second formal debate at Oxford University, where we all had to wear tuxedos and bow ties, and we had this formal banquet where we toast the royalty, all that stuff they do in Britain. It was very proper. And it's in the room. The Oxford Union is this room where parliamentary procedure started. All this really kind of fun. And so there was a three against three debate, and the topic of the debate was, that second debate was, this house believes God is a delusion. And so we were the proposition, and then there were three on the opposition. And in fact, Richard Dawkins was in the audience because Richard Dawkins wrote that book, The God Delusion. But he didn't want to do a public debate about it. But he was there. And so none of the three invited opponents actually raised any real arguments at all. They just sort of gave these impassioned speeches about the beauty and the value of their faith. They didn't say anything about the word delusion or any of that stuff. And Tripathi is a Hindu. He's a famous Hindu author. In fact, he and I have kind of become friendly. He's invited me to his place in Mumbai if I ever go back to India. Tripathi, who's Hindu, he did say something that might be an argument. I don't know. You can tell me. He said, in Hinduism, most people believe that eventually we all become gods. And if we are gods, then how can God be a delusion? Is that an argument? I don't know. I don't know if it's an argument or not, but I don't think it was very convincing to those Oxford students. There was a Roman Catholic cardinal who was there from Africa, and he basically just talked about the beauty of the Catholic faith. And there was a Sikh who's a member of Parliament, a member of the House of Lords in England, who also talked about it. But before the debate started, there were two very good Oxford students, one on our side and one on the other side, who raised, I think they did a better job than any of those invited speakers, maybe even better than us. And one of them raised, you guessed it, the fine-tuning argument. And so my job for the debate, Phil and Alex O'Connor, they went first to make the case, and my job was to mop up. My job was to be the rebuttal. And so when I got up to do my statement, there wasn't anything to rebut from these three, but this student came up with the fine-tuning argument. So that was the first time I was able to say the word contraduction in public. So it's pretty exciting. Last Wednesday, which was Valentine's Day, I sent off the final manuscript of this book to the publisher, to the editor. And the reviews and the blurbs have been really very positive. And who knows if Stephen Pinker is going to suggest it be entered into the dictionary someday. Maybe. That would be cool. But so contraduction is kind of like, it's kind of like the guy who's so impressed. How did they make all those rivers flow right along the state border? How did they do that? That must have been a huge, expensive civic undertaking to divert those riverbeds. And look at how finely tuned they are. Look at that. Perfectly fine tuned. And by the way, when they veer off, they head straight to the major cities. How does that happen? How does that design actually happen, right? Well, I think you can see that's backward, right? The rivers came first, the state borders came later. So if you thought, and I admit this is a silly argument, if you thought that the rivers were actually made to flow along the borders, you'd be thinking contradictorily. You'd be getting it backwards. Another silly example would be, look at how perfectly shaped the human nose is to support a pair of eyeglasses. Isn't that design? Isn't that amazing? How did you explain that? Of course, those of you who are wearing contacts, you have this unnecessary protuberance in your face here. You don't, you don't need that. So, as I was thinking more about it, in fact, Annie, Lori, and I were driving down, a couple months after that debate in Florida, we were driving down the Pacific Coast Highway, which I just learned has been shut down for a while. There was some flooding and raining. I think it's been shut down for a while. But anyway, we're driving down the Pacific Coast Highway, and as I was driving down this beautiful coastline, I was thinking, look at how perfectly the shape of the North American continent fits the Pacific Ocean. Look at that. Look at that. And I think it was Douglas Adams who said something about, look how perfectly the hole fits the puddle that it's in, you know? How do you explain that? It's a perfect match. And so when we got down to Santa Barbara after driving down the coast, we stayed in this historic cottage bed and breakfast inn called the Cheshire Cat Lodge. And we stayed in the Tweedledum Suite in the Cheshire Cat. And it was that next morning that I got up and I thought, you know what? This whole abductive, fine-tuning argument is just like a toothy grin on an invisible cat. There's nothing there. You're looking at it inside out and the wrong way around. And since that time, a few dozen examples have come to my mind. And I think what happens in your brain sometimes is when you put a word on something, it crystallizes it, and then you can start seeing things because you have a word for it. You can start saying, oh. And if we can flip things around and realize our train's not moving, it's the other train that's moving, not only does that solve a lot of questions, it just makes the questions disappear. Oh, you know, and I use the example of Gilda Radner on Saturday Night Live going, never mind. Do you ever see that where she got it totally wrong, but oops, never mind. And of course, the classic example of contraduction is the sunrise. Why do we call it sunrise? From our point of view, it looks like, oh, the sun is rising. And it took centuries, and it took violence even, and it took even death for us to reverse that contraduction, to reverse it from one point of view. And even those of us who know that the sun is not rising, we still use that word, don't we? We still talk about the sunrise. What do you think we should call it? The horizon set, maybe, or something else? Because our point of view is flipped. We're thinking about it the wrong way. And you know that Ptolemy, the Ptolemaic solar system, he was forced to come up with this weird Rube Goldberg machine explanation of the universe and these retrograde spheres within spheres and cycles, and to come up with why all the planets and everything seems to be moving this weird way, assuming that the Earth is static and not moving, and that everything else was. So he had to come up with this big thing, and if he just realized, the whole thing would disappear, and you would just realize, oh, that's what's going on. And you know, Bruno was killed. Bruno was put to death for asserting, and others too, who thought that the Earth was actually going around the sun and not vice versa. So contradictions can be very dangerous. And they can be in relationships, they can be in cause and effects. One of them, Annie, Lori, and I were talking about a news story about smoking. And there is a correlation between smoking and depression. And there's scholarship on both sides of it. My immediate thought was, well, smoking causes depression. If you stop smoking, you'll be less depressed. That's what I was thinking. But Annie Laurie said, no. Depression leads to smoking because it's a way of self-medication. If you're depressed, you smoke and you make yourself feel better. So which way is the causality? Which way is it? And so in the book, I suggest that, well, I don't know. Maybe there needs to be more studies about this. But either way, one of us is thinking contraductively. One of us has got it backwards, right? That thinking. And since then, just last week, actually, I read another study, a group of studies, suggesting that actually we're both right. In the short term, Annie Laurie is right that smoking or self-medication can lead to temporary relief of depression or other feelings. But in the long term, continued smoking actually increases the risk of depression. So it's kind of both, I guess. But anyway, whatever the issue is, whoever's right on this, the point of the book is to point out that we can get things backwards. We can get things wrong. The student in Oxford who gave this really very good example and illustration of the fine-tuning argument, David Logan is his name. He read the manuscript of my book, and I asked him, would you read this? Because he knows. I mean, he knows all the math. He knows all of that stuff. Could you give me some pointers on this? And he read my manuscript through, and he was very generous to do that. And he pointed out some things that he disagreed with. And he actually saved me some embarrassment. I got something wrong about probabilities, and so I'm glad he corrected me on that. But even he was saying, well, you know what? I don't think chapter 3 is a good example of contradiction. No, I don't. And I don't think chapter 8 is either. But chapter 9 and 10, and I'm thinking, so we're going to disagree on these things, but he's using the word, right? I think that's a success. Even if we disagree, he's saying, well, this is not contradictory. And I've had even some atheists and other friends of mine say, I don't know if I agree with this chapter. And you will probably disagree with 1 or 2 chapters too, and which is cool because it's not, the point is not, well, you must think this way about these things. The point is, can we train our minds to view the possibility that we're getting things backwards in our lives and backwards in reality? One example I gave is time. Is time flowing or are we flowing? The ancients thought time was the thing. There's a god, Chronos. You know, we get chronology and chronometer from it. And that it looks like time is something that's flowing. I can imagine my great-grandparents, like they were a certain distance back then, you know what I mean? In the olden times. Why do we call them olden times if they were younger back then? We call them olden times. And then I can imagine my great-grandchildren someday growing old in the future. And it's like we're kind of, like time is flowing, but maybe it's the other way around. And a lot of people have written about this, philosophers and scientists, eternalism and presentism and B theory and a whole bunch of stuff on that. But the question I'm asking is maybe just like we think the sun is rising, but it's not. Maybe we think time is flowing, but it's not. Maybe there is no such thing. Maybe there's only now. And my grandparents were living in a now, the same now I'm living in now, but because of entropy and the laws of thermodynamics and the changes around us, that's not happening. Those things are not happening against time. Those things happening are time. That's what we mean by time with those things happening. So that's one example. You might disagree with that, but it's something that people have been struggling with a lot. Another one is sleep. Have you ever asked the question, why do we sleep? What is the purpose of sleep? We ask that a lot. Scientists have been struggling. What is the purpose of sleep? Why? Well, you would only ask that question from the point of view of being awake. Trees and plants are living organisms, and do we ask if they're asleep or awake? They're alive, right? They're living beings. Maybe sleep doesn't need to be explained. Maybe sleep is the default state of the organism, and we need to be asking, what's the purpose of being awake? Because we can see why. Because those of us who are not planted in the ground, we're mobile. We have to find food and mates and escape threats and find shelter. We have to move along. But maybe the default natural state of the organism is to be asleep, and that wakefulness is what needs to be explained. And there's a Matthew Walker who wrote a book about sleep. He said, wakefulness is a kind of low-level brain damage, being awake. And you know that the longer you're awake, what happens? The longer you're awake, you know, and it's not like sleep is some action that we can choose. I think I'm going to choose to sleep today. It's not like something that we would pick to do. It's not like some activity. Sleep is, I think, and of course you can disagree with this, but I think sleep is the default state of any organism, basically. And being awake takes energy and time and risk and all of that. So, in fact, in the real estate market, homes and apartments are listed by what first? how many bedrooms they have, right? A 4-bedroom house. So you know you have a good life if you can sleep comfortably and well. And my wife, Annie Laurie, she says she liked that chapter because she has an amazing talent for sleeping in. She's just, and she loves it in sleep. And have you ever been aroused from a deep sleep and that you don't want to be, right? Being asleep is like the natural state of the organism. So that's a contradictory. If you're asking why do we sleep instead of why are we awake, that's an example. And I have other examples in there, including the Big Bang, which I rephrased as the Big Bust. And what are some other chapters? Not just time and sleep. Anyway, and you might find some more. The sociologist Phil Zuckerman wrote an article about the sinner in the mirror, he called it, where in psychology there's this thing called projection, where you take what you're feeling and you project it onto another person. Often I will explain to a believer that I don't believe in God, and they will turn around and say, "Why are you so angry?" And it's not because I'm angry, I'm just expressing myself. What's happening is that they are angry. What I say makes them angry, and they turn that around and project it back on me as if I were angry. So I think there's a contradictory thing happening in there as well. An example of a relationship was in a contradictory relationship. In the book Killers of the Flower Moon by David Gran, there's a photograph of a homeowner and her servant. And there's this woman, this white woman standing by the door of the house, and seated next to her is this dark Osage Indian woman sitting there. And a lot of viewers of that picture, without knowing anything else, would probably assume that the white woman was the homeowner and that the dark woman was the servant, right? Why would we assume that? An implicit bias maybe, but it's actually the other way around. That Osage woman had become wealthy from oil rights on her property and had hired the white woman as a servant. But in our brains, we kind of just take the point of view that's self-centered of what we're used to, and we flip things around. So I'm challenging readers of the book to look in your own life and in your own field, your own profession, for examples of contradiction. One that I just came up with last week was I'm reading that book, Who's Black and Why? And in the 18th century, white Europeans were struggling to come up with this idea that we now call race. The whole idea of race was sort of a new thing to them, and they were coming up. And the big question they have is, why are black people's skin dark? Why is that? It's some kind of, and most of them thought, in fact, many of them were benefiting directly or indirectly from the slave trade, especially in France, in Bordeaux. Why is their skin dark? What's the degenerative thing that happened there, right? They're trying to put it all together, and they have all these theories, and they got it wrong, and it was from a Eurocentric, white-centric, kind of xenophobic point of view, when actually we now know that it's the other way around, that black skin and dark eyes are the natural full pigmentation of the human species, and that white skin is a mutation, a good mutation if you're going to survive up there where you lack vitamin D. So they didn't see that. From their point of view, the sun was rising, but actually it was the other way around. The horizon is setting. And so the analogy I use is kind of like in the fall, the green leaves start to lose their color. They get pale, they get orange or yellow, and then they fall off. And that's kind of what's happening with the northern white-skinned people having to adjust, having this mutation, having the lighter eyes and the skin adjust so you can get more vitamin D. It's not to say that fall colors are not beautiful, because they can be. And in fact, it's great because otherwise the whites would not have survived. They would have died out. That mutation was actually beneficial. But the contradiction was thinking from their point of view, what's wrong with this dark skin? How did that happen? How did that degenerative condition arise? And they all came up with these weird ideas, really stupid ideas, the climate, or all this stuff, when they didn't realize they were thinking contradictorily. They got it backwards. So, and then you probably will think of some more. When it comes to fine tuning, I do mention the hypothesis that I'm not defending in the book, but the hypothesis that a multiverse could explain fine-tuning. And you've probably heard that if there's billions of multiverses, then we happen to be living in the lucky one where where observers could have evolved, right? You hear that a lot. And that would answer the question. But for now, the multiverse is a hypothesis. And so what I'm saying is that the multiverse still needs to be proved, and we shouldn't claim too much or try to prove too much with the multiverse because it looks like an easy out. Meaning the probabilities are so low, but if the numerator is higher and if the denominator is this huge number that makes it unlikely that life would exist, who's to say there's only one number in the numerator? Maybe it's 2 or 4 or 10 or 1,000, or maybe it's a square of the denominator. Who knows? In which case, what does that do to likelihood and probability, right? Observers can only exist, and this is sometimes called the anthropic principle, in a universe that allows observers to exist. And so here we are. We're in one of those. But what I say is that the multiverse, and a lot of scientists are supporting the multiverse, by the way. Vic Stenger, if you know, he wrote a great book, The Fallacy of Fine-Tuning, where he says the multiverse is at least in principle plausible, but we can't just say it without observation. What I'm saying is that the multiverse hypothesis can be used as a counter to the intelligent designer hypothesis. Both of them lack evidence, right? But if you're going to pretend abductively that an intelligent designer is the best explanation for the appearance of fine-tuning, well then why can't I also claim abductively that the multiverse is a good explanation? Neither of them is going to prove anything, but it's like imaginary numbers in an equation. They'll cancel each other out. We can say at least my unproved hypothesis is a natural one. Yours is a supernatural one. In my unproved hypothesis, at least we know something about natural laws, right? In cause and effect. Yours, we don't know anything. We don't know anything about supernatural laws. We don't know how those things work at all. So the multiverse isn't going to solve anything, but the multiverse can be used to counter, like matter and antimatter. It can make the debate back off and say, wait a minute, okay, both of us are going to have to wait here until there is more good, testable, verifiable evidence, or very, very, very strong reasoning. Sometimes indirect reasoning can be useful in science. So, you know, I used to be a preacher, and preachers can talk forever, and I don't know when to stop sometimes. Did you know that the word reverend was a typo? Did you know that? The first letter used to be an N. Some of you are going to wake up tomorrow and laugh. Oh! So I could talk forever and ever. Anyway, you got to be the first audience to hear a kind of half-baked explanation of the new book. And when it comes out, you'll be able to say, I was there, I heard it. I was one of the first to hear that word, contraduction. And maybe, don't pray about it, but maybe if the word does get accepted, it's only going to happen if people start seeing some value in it and start using it and start thinking about the world in a reverse way to maybe make some of these silly supernatural problems disappear.
When I finally broke free of it all.
Wow.
And I never heard the word epistemology or knew what it was before I left.
Yeah, wow. So that's really insular, isn't it?
It is. It's very insular. It's very, you know, you follow this way and that's it. And we keep you so busy doing work in this that you don't have time to step out and think about anything else.
We had a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses on our TV show, and one of them, he was from Germany, he said, I don't know if this is true of all of them, but when they go out to do their witnessing or whatever, standing on the street corner, they come back to fill out a card. And they fill out this card that shows how many hours they put in, and that really when they're coming door to door or out in this corner, they're just clocking the hours so they can go back and put on the card that I did my time.
And you know what's funny though? Yeah, that is 100% true until recently.
Really?
Because recently they just did away with the requirement. Now, and this is kind of, I guess this could fall into your word contradictory here, because most of the rank and file do not have to report hours anymore. All they have to do now is check a box saying that they participated in the ministry. Now, the ones that they call pioneers or the ones that are supposed to put in a certain amount of time every month of knocking on doors. Those ones still have to report time.
And so it makes you feel good at the end of the day that you've checked that box, right?
Well, it also makes it easy for those who are trying to get out of it to still keep relations with their family going, because they can keep a box checked and not have to really do anything.
That would be a good title for a book, Checking the Boxes or Unchecking the Boxes.
There you go.
Or, well, anyway, but I like talking with them, and we, Jehovah's Witness took some important lawsuits, actually, which was very good for freedom of religion and speech. So.
I think we can allow about half hour for Q&A before we got to start back up the room by 4. Do you want to get us started on questions? If not, I've got a few.
Well, I just want to make a quick announcement real quick about the questions. If everybody could, please come up to the podium to ask your question, because I am recording this for YouTube. So I'd like it to be clear on the mic if that's okay with everybody. So other than that, we can go ahead and start.
Well, I would allow for, if anybody doesn't want to be recorded, that you can just trim that portion out. You don't have to go too wide necessarily. So
Correct.
We can handle that post edit. So we don't want to out anybody that's not already out as an atheist public grade. We understand that's not for everybody. Not everybody is out in the field as an activist. So yeah, we just allow for that as well.
And for that portion of it, if you don't want to be on the mic, I'll write the question down and I'll put it as a caption on the screen for the question, so you don't have to be on camera or voice or anything. So thank you for saying that. So,
do you want me to start it off?
If you'd like to, go right ahead.
So Dan, I know you've been an activist for a long time, and so I want to kind of pick your brain on this. It can be hard for a lot of us that are activists to remain optimistic in today's world, especially with the growing threat of Christian nationalism. What is it that keeps you going in this fight?
Well, it would be me and Annie Laurie and all of our staff and the attorneys. Besides the fact that it's a lot of fun. I mean, this is just a blast, being able to do these things and take the lawsuits and do the media and all of that. We think that the country right now is becoming much less religious, and all the studies are showing that. The fastest growing religion in the United States right now is non-religion. About almost 30% of Americans now say they have no religious identification. That doesn't mean they're all atheists. It depends on what studies you look at. But the fact that we still have a First Amendment, we still have some smart people in the courts, gives us hope that things can change and things will change. And so even though the current Supreme Court is really, really bad now, going out of their way to be especially bad on state-church separation, privileging religion, taking cases they never should have taken because they know it will help religion. We still have, those principles are still in place. Most of those principles, when it comes to school, they're still really pretty solid, really solid. And even this current conservative Supreme Court is admitting that if there's coercion involved, and that certainly happens at the school level, then it would be unconstitutional. So we're seeing change, we're noticing change. We like to pretend that the Freedom from Religion Foundation had a little bit to do with the country becoming less religious, maybe to some degree. But I think it's more of a bottom-up thing. And sometimes we get criticized for atheism. No atheist regime has ever respected human rights. And they're talking about Stalin and Pol Pot and all that. And Phil Zuckerman points out that, well, yeah, we're not in favor of top-down atheism where we have to control everybody to think like us. But organically, maybe that's a contradiction. Flip it around, bottom up, organic free thought and atheism is healthy, where people are not forced to believe or not to believe, but they have the freedom to think like they want. If you remove the threat of hell and if you remove the authority of the church, I think there'd be a lot more non-religious people. And ultimately, we really don't care what people believe. You can believe whatever you want. If you want to stand in your head and pray to Mother Goose, you know what I mean? If you want to pray to a God who has the head of an elephant, you know, Paul and I, our communications director, we were in India last year, and we saw people going into the temple to worship the elephant head god, right? Which some Hindus were saying is proof that the Hindu scriptures were prophetic, because they prophesied plastic surgery even way back then. Can you believe that? So we don't care what people believe, but people should be judged by their actions. And in many of the actions that we take, we are joined by Christians and Jews. There are there's a group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism, and we've had them on our TV show, and we've had them, some of them speak at our convention, because we are marching in the same marches for human rights. And it's what they do that we should be critical of. And if they're infringing rights, if they're hurting people, people can believe in faith healing if they want. But if they refuse to take their children to the doctor because they believe the Bible says the prayer of faith will heal the sick, I think we moral people have an obligation at least to criticize that. So you believe what you want, but you're hurting your kids, right? So we're optimistic. We've seen change in our lifetime. And for now, we have a constitution that we can work with and we can win lawsuits with. And besides, it's just a lot of fun. It's not that fun should be the motivation, but just to be able to be engaged and meet people all over and to talk with authors. What a fun job I have. I get to read these books, and then I get to call the author up and talk to them on our show, which is really fun. So I know not everybody's the same. Some people say, let's leave the country. And I think, well, then we're more needed now when things are bad. There's that old cliche that the light is lighter when the night is darker kind of thing. So even if things do seem bad right now, those of us who are activists and working for good causes, even when we lose, at least we are shining a light in what we could call the darkness. And that's not a bad analogy, because look at the word enlightenment, right? The Enlightenment was replacing years of the dark ages, the dark times.
Anybody else?
Yes, sir. When will the Bible be put in the fiction section of the library? That's the key.
The question was, when will the Bible be put in the fiction section?
Of the library.
Well, actually, some of our members have done that. And a lot of believers, a lot of Christians, even Thomas Jefferson, who was a deist really, but he read the Bible. He thought Jesus was a good man. Even he cut out a lot of the crap from it. He took a razor blade and cut out all the supernatural stuff. And if you think crap is a strong word, the word he used was, he was writing to Adam, saying that the reason he cut the Bible up was, he said, you could find some good teachings of Jesus in the Bible, but it's like looking through a dunghill for a diamond. So he used the word dunghill in his days to talk about what the Bible was. And he knew that a lot of it was fictional, and so that's a good question. Most libraries have a religious section, so you would have the Bhagavad Gita, and you would have the Quran and the Book of Mormon and that, so I guess you and I think it's fictional. What?
I saw other hands on this row.
I was curious about if you work with ex-Muslims, or what your opinion on Muslim faith would be.
So his question is, do we work with ex-Muslims, and what would our opinion be of the Muslim faith? Yes, primarily in the United States. It doesn't come up that often. Once in a while in the United States, but I'm going to tell you, we do work internationally with a lot of groups too. But the few things that have happened in the United States are like in Minneapolis, where they passed a city ordinance allowing the mosque to blast this call to prayer in the neighborhood, even to people who don't believe that, right? So there's a little bit of a problem. It's not that they're not free to believe in Islam, but if their actions are impacting other people, that shouldn't be allowed. But Annie Laurie and I in FFRF work with a lot of international groups. There's a woman named Mariam Namazi who is helping, and we're also helping as well. Some of the Muslims in some of their countries are under death threats. Some of them have been put to death. Some of them had to leave because of their lack of belief. And so in England, Mariam has a group called One Law for All. There should not be Sharia law in a country. There should be one law for all people and not make special exceptions. And I've debated 8 different Islamic scholars over the years. One over in Long Island, and then once over in Dearborn, Michigan. And they all tend to be really nice people. They're very polite, good food, and most of them, I think, are just really decent, good people who are using their religion as a vehicle for their goodness. And I think any religion, Islam or Christianity or whatever you call it, any religion can be like a megaphone. It can be like the kind of person that you are already, the religion can amplify that. If you're a good, caring person, your religion can be a vehicle for you to be an even better, stronger, caring person. We see that a lot. There's a lot of good religious people, a lot of good Muslims in the world doing good things. But if you're a violent, crappy person, your religion can amplify that as well. And we see that with Christian nationalists, and we see that with these extremist Muslims who are using their faith not for the goodness of it, but because of the war mentality of it. So Islam is just another Abrahamic faith that's false. It's not a true religion. I mean, it's not a true belief system. But again, we would support people's freedom to believe in Islam if that's what they choose. I was just hearing on the radio, maybe you heard it today too, Thomas Jefferson actually bought a Quran. He wanted to learn, what are these teachings? He was reading it more from a point of view of law. What's the basis of law? And if you go to the Supreme Court, you will see Moses up there carrying part of the Ten Commandments, but you will also see Muhammad on the other frieze carrying part of the Quran. And so our American system sort of honors all the lawgivers, real or fictional or religious in history. And so Islam has its place in our country, I think, as long as they're not trying to force it on other people.
Anyone else?
So my question is, I have children in school, and I'm seeing a lot more religious undertones in school. It's been a very hot topic here in Virginia lately. Where is FFRF's standing? Are you seeing that a lot more? Are you not seeing it? And what advice would you have for us who kids are actually being more indoctrinated in school into Christianity?
Yes, and I assume you're talking about public schools.
Yes.
As opposed to private schools. But my foot got all tangled up here. Yeah, and that's the biggest single issue we deal with is religion in the schools. Our attorneys have categories. Then there's a few dozen different issue areas that our attorneys are dealing with. You know, legislative prayer, or the post office, or public money going to religious groups, or voucher. You know, there's all these different issues. But the biggest single one we get is religion in the schools. And it can be all sorts of things. And just last week, we stopped a kindergarten teacher from, she did it in December. She passed out these candy canes during December to the children with this Bible verses and stuff on it. And did you know, she's telling the kid, did you know that the white is the purity of Jesus? And the red is the blood of Jesus? Did you know that? And if you turn the candy cane upside down, what letter does it make? J for Jesus. So she sends this home with these students, right? And a family complained. They said, why are we getting religious stuff from our public school? And we complained, and the teacher was told to stop. Because of our letter, the principal sent them a memo and put it in their employee record that they had broken the law. They're not supposed to be doing that. So we can complain. If you see it happening, if your child has an issue that feels uncomfortable, that is not right, then you may not want to put your head up. You may not want to be the family that's complaining. And that happens a lot, especially a lot of small towns. They don't want to be the people complaining against the Bible. We can write on your behalf, and we do that all the time. So it's really simple. Go to our webpage, which is ffrf.org, and under legal, you'll see make a complaint. And under there are these categories, and there's a lot of FAQs, because sometimes we can't do anything about it. Sometimes it might be legal, like the Good News Club right after school that happens. That's actually legal. And the only way to fight back with that is to ask for equal time and that's what the Satanist group is doing right now, which is pretty cool, fighting back equal time. And it's amazing because the school says, we need to have freedom of religion in our school, so the Good News Club, but as soon as the Satanists come in, maybe we don't need to have freedom of religion in the school. So that's pretty neat. And so we can write a letter, and the letter will be a legal letter. We won't threaten legal action, but it has all the legal precedents and the lawsuits and why this is wrong and why this teacher or this principal. And it's happening at school board meetings too as well. And a lot of school boards confuse the Supreme Court's allowance of legislative prayer with school board prayer. They're totally different things. But a lot of school boards think, well, the Supreme Court under the Greece decision allowed for legislative prayer. That means we can pray too. But you can't. The school system's different. There are students at the school board. There are students on the school board. So some of them have school board members. So we can write a letter, we can complain, and as much as you know, the name of the principal, the name of the teacher, and as much detail as even a photograph, like the religious posters in the schools or whatever, then we can make a complaint, and we should win that complaint, and often we do. And what we can say is that we're not some outside Wisconsin group meddling with your local stuff. There's the family in the school right now with children who are impacted by this, and it's not fair that the school is taking sides with what the parents are teaching. How would they like it if some atheist teacher were to get up and tell all the students, you should stop believing in Jesus and God because it's a myth? You know they would get complaints. You know there'd be parents saying, what? Why are you doing? The school should be for all of us. So we non-religious families have just as much right to be free from that indoctrination in our public schools as anyone else. And we can write at least on your behalf. How did I get all tangled up here? There we go.
So, good afternoon, Mr. Barker. I've read Your Godless. I've read 2 of Andrew Seidel's books. You mentioned earlier the nuns and Christian nationalism. I kind of thought of a contradiction for you.
All right.
Do you think that the rise of the nuns is causing the Christian nationalism, evangelical clutching at power, or do you think it's the other way around? Do you think their clutching at power is causing people to reject it and become nuns?
Good question. Yes, Andrew's books are wonderful. You know, he used to work for us, and now he's working for Americans United. And his name is pronounced Seidel. You said Seidel. No, his name is pronounced Seidel. I'm sorry. You said Seidel, right? See, there's a contradiction. I got it backwards. No, don't check the video. Make me look dumb. But anyway, he is a leading expert on. And you may know about this new movie that Rob Reiner's come out with, God and Country. Andrew's in there. He's quoted quite a lot. And so are a lot of Christians complaining about Christian nationalism. So what comes first? Well, that's a good question. We'll have to analyze that. I kind of think, and I've been saying this for many decades, and so has Annie Laurie, that the religious right has been losing and losing and losing, at least in the public opinion. And in the courts too, prayer in the schools, and in creationism in the schools, and birth control, and on. They've been losing and losing and losing, and so they're trying to turn to the courts to force. They're trying to instead of winning public opinion, they want it to be forced on us by the courts, and of course with the recent appointments to the courts, they have some power now. So we think it's kind of like a wounded animal in the forest that's knows it's dying, but it's going to go down taking everything it can with it. It's going to strip all the bark off the trees. It's going to go down angry. And the religious right now knows that they live in a post-Christian country. We're not a Christian nation, and yet they're trying to desperately hold on to all of that. Their numbers are smaller. Even as time goes by, the younger generation is much, much less religious than it used to be. Since 2016, there are many, many millions of young people who have come of voting age, and that demographic is much less religious. And there are a lot of millions of older people who have passed on, who are gone now. And so there's a big shift happening in our country right now. So let's think about what the contradiction is there. Which way does it go? One of the examples that I raised is death anxiety. Is death anxiety a cause for religion, or is religion a cause for death anxiety? Which way is it? I actually don't know. Maybe some of you know more than I do. Some people think if there were no religion, there'd be less death anxiety because they're putting that on you, right? So what is the cause and effect in that situation? But
Anyone else? Front row.
Great to meet you,
Hi.
Dan. I'm Frank Aiello. I'd ask you to speculate on two questions. One is, when will Congress allow secular invocation? I know you recently, I think, lost a request to provide a secular invocation through the courts. You were denied, and correct me if that's wrong. And what do you speculate is the possibility that we'll be able to expand the Supreme Court and enact term limits?
well, I can say a lot about your first question. The second one is really speculation. We are in favor of some kind of court reform, whatever that looks like, expanding it or rotating or who knows what. It seems like expansion just makes good sense anyway, because the country's larger, there are more districts now. There used to be one justice for every district, and if you count the military, I think there would be 13, would be about a good number. But anyway, there's a lot of arguments for that and against that, and we think there should be some court reform, and not just at the Supreme Court level, also at the lower court level. But regarding the chaplain, our member of Congress in Madison, Wisconsin is Mark Pocan. He's a local business owner, and Dane County, where we live, happens to be 52 or 53% non-religious. The job of a representative is what? To represent, right? So we happen to live in one of those counties. I don't know what this county would be like for the religious break. Okay, so Mark Pocan is quite an activist. His husband was going to come to Congress and then went to visit Congress as a spouse. Years ago could not be included as a husband or a spouse. Congress rules were that, well, this would be your spouse, your husband or wife, or a designated other. And he was thinking, how romantic is that? Here's my designated other. Anyway, he got that rule changed. He got the rule changed, and now his husband can come in with him as a spouse to Congress. So you're right. A few years ago, Mark Pocan asked the chaplain of the House of Representatives if I could come in as a guest chaplain. And this is almost hard to believe, but there's two chaplains, one in the Senate and one in the House. And in total, they're paid, at least the last time we checked, about $800,000. They have a small staff. Their job is to open each session with a prayer, 30, 60, 90 seconds. That's their job. They're getting paid this big salary, and then in a loose kind of way, they're kind of like a counselor for the members of Congress who want a chaplain or something, right? So Mark Pocan asked Chaplain Conroy at the time, who was chaplain under Trump, to represent my district. I would like Dan Barker of the Freedom from Religion Foundation to be a guest chaplain. And the chaplains in both houses do allow for guest chaplains, which means that a member of Congress can request, could my local rabbi, like what was his name? Anyway, a Jewish member of Congress could say, I'd like my rabbi to, which they've allowed. And they've had other chaplains. And so Mark Pocan asked Patrick Conroy, you can guess what religion he was, and he turned it down. He started putting up all these rules that never applied to anyone else. He started saying things like, well, you have to be an ordained minister. Well, I am. I have an ordination, right? Well, you have to be still practicing in the church that you're ordained in. And I said, well, my church, quote unquote, is different. It's the Freedom from Religion Foundation, right? But we found out through discovery that a whole bunch of non-ordained people who were not practicing in their religion had been guest chaplains before. In fact, they even invited some gospel singer named Amy, who wasn't ordained anything, to open Congress with a prayer. And part of it is so that members of Congress can honor people in their district, that represents their district. Anyway, he put up all these roadblocks and all these rules and basically said no, that I could not be invited. And it's not like any of us have the right to go to Congress and say, I want to open Congress with a prayer. The chaplains are there at the pleasure of the members of Congress. So since Mark Pocan is a member of Congress and he asked for that at his pleasure, the chaplain should have agreed in diversity. And they have different points of view. But he did not want an atheist opening up prayer. So we went to court, and we lost at the court level, but on really bad grounds, really bad grounds. And we went to the appeals court, and the appeals court said, "Yeah, that was stupid. That was a bad decision. That was really bad ground, but we're still going to rule against you because." And here's what the court said in the D.C. Circuit. Because the House can make its own rules, and the judiciary is not going to interfere with the rules that the House makes. And if the House has these rules in place, then that's their business. If they want to keep out an atheist, So about the Congressional Free Thought Caucus now that's been formed. Now there's 20 members. Jamie Raskin and Jared Huffman were co-founders of it. After we lost that case, they were scratching their heads, and Mark Pocan too. We went to a meeting with them in one of the legislative buildings, and they said, "What can we do?" And they thought, well, maybe we can just change the rules. Just like Pocan changed the rule about a designated other, you can just change the rules. And there's a whole process for rule changing. But at the time, it wasn't politically right because they're all running for office in that. Well, now there's a new chaplain, a Presbyterian woman named Kibben. And not only has Mark Pocan renewed the request to Kibben that I come in and be a guest chaplain to represent, but the Congressional Free Thought Caucus also wrote a letter to Kibben, signed by a lot of these members of Congress, saying this isn't right. We should have fairness and representation. And they sent an actual, really strong letter, and Pocan's office is following up with them, with the chaplain's office. And so far, guess what the response has been? Dead silence. Nothing. And they're waiting and waiting. Nothing. And how would they do that with any other request, right? So at this point, we're wondering what to do. And if there is no progress, if this current chaplain says no, or just doesn't say anything, then maybe a rule change would be in place. And that's quite a thing to do, but you can do that. The Congress can change its rules. And the arguments they're making are good arguments. Diversity, representation, fairness, equality, right? What's to keep someone in Conroy said, well, you need to be able to invoke a higher power. And I said, and in fact, he didn't require to see a draft of my remarks, but I sent him one anyway. I said, here, look, read this. This isn't offending anybody. This is invoking the power of reason, the higher power in all of our minds that we have to make good decisions, that kind of a thing, very humanistic thing. He didn't like that because you know what a higher power means to him and his religion. So we're waiting to see what happens. And it's been years and years going through this process. But we have real smart members of Congress on our side on this, wanting to make a difference. It'd be so cool to have the first atheist, quote-unquote, prayer before Congress. But so here's another thing not to pray about. Okay.
I think we're out of time for Q&A. I want to allow some time for everyone to talk to Dan, and we've got books up front here. If you're not familiar with the local chapter, not of FFRF, but sorry, of the Washington Area Secular Humanists, we are the Southeastern Virginia Atheist Skeptics and Humanists. We have a flyer up front here next to the FFRF flyers, so feel free to grab those. You can find us on Facebook, Meetup, and Discord. We have all kinds of social events that happen. We do a lot of activist work as well. We have a secular advocacy team that's very active right now in the Virginia legislature. We just had crossover, so like a lot of the bad bills we helped make go away. We defeated all the anti-trans bills, so hell yeah on that. But we still got a long way to go on some of the good bills that we're trying to get passed. Unfortunately, one of the big ones that we were working on, medical aid and dying, we do not have the votes to get it through the House. It made it all the way through the Senate this year, so that is historical. We've never made it that far before, but we did have a bill in both the House and the Senate for that. Unfortunately, the House just doesn't have the numbers for it this year. But every year that we've introduced a bill like that, we've made it further and further. So I encourage people to get involved. We can always use more help with that. the more hands that we have in it, it seems the more successful we are. So if you're interested in that, like I said, we got the flyers up front, and then you can contact me or our co-chair for the secular advocacy team is Matt DeGrave. He's another activist and volunteer with American Atheists. So yeah, we're affiliated basically with all of the national organizations. That's something I actually need to talk to Dan about now that I remember that. But yeah, so lots to see and do. If you have any questions, you can see me about that. But let's all give Dan a big round of applause. Thank you again for coming all the way out to Chesapeake for this. And we chose Chesapeake specifically because we do have a lot going on with the school board, especially because we did have a fight with them on the Good News Club. We did bring in the After School Satan Club. We were very successful in that. Got the rules changed. Unfortunately, they pushed everything back for what they're calling non-exempt groups that cannot meet after school until 6 o'clock now. So the Good News Club pulled out, but then so did we, because we didn't want to be the only religious club there. So I count that as a win.
It is a win.
Yeah. So, but we're kind of a big metropolitan area here because we got Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Suffolk. There's all of it is happening in all of the cities. So Chesapeake was just kind of the first biggest fight because of how entrenched, especially the Forbes family is here. So that we chose that very deliberately to push back on. So now that we've won in Chesapeake, we've got our sights set on Virginia Beach. We've had some other wins in Norfolk with the city council. They were opening with prayer. We had one of our Satanist friends come in and request to do a prayer, and they changed the rules. They went to a moment of silence. And I count that as a win.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
yeah, we're making progress. So, yeah.
Wow.
So thank you again, Dan. We appreciate you. Thanks everybody for coming out. There's some stickers, other flyers, CDs, like you said. Books are for sale. Dan, if you don't mind signing my copy.
Okay. So this stuff is all just free stuff here.
Yeah, he's been to a couple of our events already.
Oh, I do. Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know that we have a.
So there you have it, everybody. Mr. Dan Barker. What a wonderful speech he gave. And again, want to thank him for coming out to our CVASH group and talking about his new book, Contraduction. It was just a fascinating speech. Hopefully, if you're into reading books, unlike me, you go out and grab yourself a copy of it and maybe use a new coined word that he made, contraduction. So keep your eyes out for that. And also please keep your eyes out for my latest videos as well. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share these videos to help get them out to the algorithms. And again, thank you everybody for joining me, and I'll see you next time.